I'm Tawny Plattis, and you're listening to Dirty Bits, the podcast that explores the dirty bits of history your teacher probably left out. Catherine the Great had a bit of a reputation. She was the longest ruling female leader of Russia, reigning from 1762 until her death in 1796 at the age of 67. Under her reign, Russia grew larger and stronger than ever, and was recognized as one of the greatest powers in Europe. She was a domineering, determined, confident, aggressive, and powerful woman. She also had a string of affairs with handsome young men, was called sexually insatiable, a nymphomaniac, and allegedly got it on with a stallion. While many urban legends and conflicting opinions from historians are tied to her name, what's so much fun about Catherine is that they actually stem from some real events. In 1744, the Empress of Russia, Elizabeth Petrovna, invites a potential bride for her nephew to St. Petersburg, Catherine the Great, a German princess from a part of Prussia that's now Poland and who is at the time going by her birth name, Sophie Friederike Augusta von Anhalt-Zerbst-Dornberg. Due to that kerfuffle of nonsense, I'm going to refer to the aforementioned queen, formerly known as Sophie, as Catherine from here on out. So the 15-year-old princess is a likely candidate to marry the heir to the Russian throne, Peter III. And she travels with her controlling mother, who she's actually looking forward to eventually leaving behind in Prussia. Catherine's mother, Johanna, was the great-granddaughter of the King of Denmark, but was poor and married to an old geezer who lived out in the boonies. She had a really difficult time giving birth to Catherine, didn't recover for 19 weeks, and it's said she found her daughter a shitty consolation prize for the misery she endured. Joanna was cold, abusive, jealous, and resented Catherine, never missing an opportunity to berate her. She let her own brother sexually assault Catherine, and then even considered marrying her off to him before receiving the Russian marriage proposal from Empress Elizabeth, which is just one example of her treating her daughter as a means for political advancement and why she had zero chance at winning Mother of the Year. So even though she's stoked to be getting away from her mom, when they get to Russia, Catherine's totally repulsed by her intended, Peter III. He's been an alcoholic since the age of 10. He's still playing with toy soldiers in bed at the age of 15. He has this weird obsession with the military. He's pockmarked, sickly, which is a little shallow of Catherine to mention. But he does beat his dogs, so you know he's an asshole. And then on top of all of that, she falls extremely ill with pleuritis and almost dies. The Russian Empress is a big fan of bloodletting, and Catherine is having phlebotomies like 4 times a day, which is just appalling to her mom, Joanna, who's already on thin ice because she's allegedly involved in some court intrigue to overthrow the Empress Elizabeth and was just an all-around gossipy bitch. And then Joanna has the gall to ask for a Lutheran priest when it looks like her daughter's going to die, which is extremely offensive to the Empress because the religion of the kingdom is Russian Orthodoxy. But Catherine hears her mom essentially screwing everything up, and she bolts up in bed saying, "I don't want any Lutheran, I want my Orthodox father." And the Empress Elizabeth is totally endeared to her forever after this, of course. Catherine throws herself into all things Russian, and she walks around her room all night barefoot, reciting her lessons, becoming fluent in the language until she gets pneumonia. She even converts to Russian Orthodoxy, much to the dismay of her Lutheran parents. Her father's so ticked off he doesn't even attend her wedding. But she says in her memoirs that she was willing to do anything to qualify her to wear the Russian crown, writing in her autobiography, "When I have promised myself something, I cannot recall ever having failed to do it." So she marries this Peter guy, and they can't stand each other right off the bat. They live on opposite sides of the palace, and it's not even clear if they ever consummate the marriage. She later wrote about the unhappy union, saying, "My heart did not foresee great happiness. Ambition alone sustained me. At the bottom of my soul, I had something, I know not what, that never for a single moment let me doubt that sooner or later I would succeed in becoming the sovereign Empress of Russia in my own right." But even though she's disgusted by her husband, she doesn't have an actual claim to the throne, and she has to produce an heir. And as much as she dislikes Peter, he's not too fond of her either. So they're like 7 years into their marriage, and Catherine is already proving to be a master politician. She's actually able to maneuver herself into such a good situation by making the right friends that she allegedly gets the Empress, her mother-in-law, to condone her relationship with her first lover, Sergei Saltykov, when she was 23 in 1752, because Peter isn't getting the job done. Her mother-in-law basically tells her, "Look, I don't care who you have to screw. You need to get an heir up in there." And Catherine looks at Sexy Pants Saltykov like, "Don't gotta tell me twice." So she has her first child, Paul, in 1754. His appearance and mannerisms were an awful lot like Catherine's husband, but in her memoirs, she's pretty clear that the father was actually her chamberlain, Sergei Saltykov. And interestingly, Peter, her husband, at the time swore up and down that the baby was his son despite his hatred of Catherine. And that's odd because if Peter had declared the boy a bastard, he would have had every reason in the eyes of the church to obtain a divorce and get rid of her, which he frequently told people was what he wanted to do. But Ancestry.com has only investigated Warren G. Harding's illegitimate child thus far, so the mystery remains. After that, Catherine starts taking names and tapping ass on the reg. There's this guy named Stanislaw, not to be confused with Stannis Baratheon, who's a Polish noble who shows up in St. Petersburg as a member of the British Embassy. And she's not a shy woman, so she aggressively pursued him, likely taking his virginity. She was attracted to the wit, bookishness, and sensitivity that he possessed in contrast to her idiot husband. Her words, not mine. And they have this whole torrid love affair that ends with them being discovered, so he has to dip out of Russia, and then they break up but stay friends. With Stanislaw, she even finagles getting him crowned King of Poland, mostly just so she can be the puppet master of the country, and she later ends up dethroning him because he's difficult to control, but I'm sure it was good to be king while it lasted. Catherine's like the best ex-girlfriend in the world because she always ends her relationships on the most ideal terms. She's like Phoebe from Friends. She has between 10 and 22 lovers in her life, and she was monogamous with every one of them. She was super chill if either of them wanted to move on, and she would give them a stipend. Like, she'd straight up give them titles, land, palaces, and even people. For real, she gave one guy more than 1,000 indentured servants. But here's the thing. Catherine's husband has his own mistress, Elizaveta Romanovna Vorostova, who's been described as a slob who swore like a soldier, squinted her eyes, smelled bad, and spit while talking, and looked like a scullery maid of the lowliest kind. Catherine specifically described her as a very ugly, extremely dirty child with olive skin because she was also a little racist. So Peter has his mistress living next door to him. She's constantly at his side, and Catherine learns that her husband is plotting to divorce and banish her to a convent so he can marry his mistress, Elizaveta. So Catherine's like, oh crap, I have to do something about this guy. And she joins these powerful political groups that oppose her husband, the emperor. And the leader of one of these groups is this artillery officer who's serving in the capital, Grigory Orlov. And they start shacking up, and she's like, listen, sweetie, the Empress is about to die, my dumbass husband is about to take the throne, and I'm not about to be a nun. We need to start thinking about getting the troops together so I can get in there. So the Empress dies, and Peter III becomes emperor, all the while Catherine and her co-conspirators are plotting to overthrow him. But when he's 6 months into his reign, he finds out about the plot and arrests one of the guys who's in on it. Catherine finds out, and she's like, oh shit, it's go time, we gotta do this, now, now, now! So she rallies up her soldiers, and they arrest her husband, forcing him to sign an abdication to the throne so her position couldn't be disputed as empress because he willingly gave her the crown, because mama didn't raise no fool. And she's crowned Empress of Russia in 1762 at the age of 33, while her husband is strangled in prison by the brother of her side bitch, and she's like, whoa, hey, whoa. I said just imprison him for the rest of his life, not kill him, just so everyone knows. I didn't have anything to do with that shit. And people are like, she totally had everything to do with that shit. But nobody says anything, and Catherine proceeds to be a juggernaut. She's a master at statecraft, balancing the favor between different politicians, crushing rebellions, winning wars, and expanding Russia's borders. She's super intelligent and maintains a correspondence with Voltaire, while simultaneously ushering in the Russian Enlightenment period and introducing progressive policies for serfs and commoners. At this point, she's just balling out of control. During the coup, when she overthrew her husband, this foxy sergeant is hanging out with her, and she's like, "Oh, hey there, you're a tall drink of vodka, aren't you? What's your name, sexy?" And it's Grigory Potemkin. So she breaks up with her lover, Orlov, who helped her stage the coup, who she also had a kid with when she was married to her late husband. And she breaks up with him not only because she found him to be incompetent in politics, but because she just found out he was seducing his 13-year-old niece. And Catherine, if you recall, was also the victim of her mother's own creepy brother. And Orlov is like super bummed, and he stays in his room listening to Adele until he's like, "Oh, I remember Kathy wanted that big-ass diamond." So he gets her this huge 190-carat diamond that's half the size of a chicken's egg. Today it's known as the Orlov diamond. And he gives it to her, and she's like, "Oh my God, you're so sweet. We aren't getting back together, but tell you what, I'm gonna give you a pension and a great job because I want to stay on good terms. I like you." So they break up but stay friends because, again, she's like the best girlfriend ever. So she sends this note to Potemkin where she's like, "You're so good at all the military junk, and I'm really impressed by you. I really hope you don't get hurt out there being all manly and strong." And he's like, holy shit, she's down. So he drops everything and runs to her side, and they're inseparable. They've been described as soulmates, and there are rumors that they were even secretly married. They have these adorable love letters where she talks to him in baby talk and says, "General, do you love me? Me love you very much." She calls him a genius as well as her tiger, her hero, her idol, and her dearest friend. Their letters have been described by biographers as passionate and consuming. He'd be staying in the palace and they'd send these naughty notes back and forth through their servants. So they're basically lying in bed Snapchatting each other all night. And there's this one surviving note where Potemkin has to apologize for being a jealous jerk earlier. And the letter is so funny because it's not far off from how we speak today in the translation I found. You can totally picture their faces as they're writing back and forth and thinking, "Yeah, that's a good reply." So the letter goes, "Potemkin, allow me, my precious dear, to say these final words that I think will end our row." And Catherine says, "I permit you, the sooner the better." Potemkin, don't be so surprised that I'm so uneasy about our love. Catherine, be calm. Potemkin, beyond the innumerable gifts you bestowed me. Catherine, one hand washes the other. Potemkin, you've placed me in your heart. Catherine, firmly and solidly. Potemkin, I want to be there alone, preferred to all former ones. Catherine, you are and will be. Potemkin, since no one has so loved you as I. Catherine, I see and believe it. Potemkin, and since I am the work of your hands, so I desire that you should secure my peace. Catherine, I'm happy with all my soul. Potemkin, that you should find joy in doing me good. Catherine, my foremost pleasure. Potemkin, that you should devise everything for my comfort. Catherine, it'll come by itself. Potemkin, and find therein repose from the great labors that occupy your lofty station. Amen. Catherine, let your thoughts be calm so that your feelings can act freely. They are tender and will find the best way themselves. End of quarrel. Amen. And they were really happy for 3 years until he got restless. So they amicably broke up, but they remained tight friends that hooked up when they were both single and horny. And Catherine was super horny all the time. So what Potemkin does is he essentially becomes her pimp. He keeps an eye out for her, and if he sees a guy he thinks that she'd like, Potemkin lets her know. And if she's interested, she has a lady in waiting, the Countess Praskovia Bruce, who was called l'éprouveuse, or tester of male capacity. So she has sex with these guys and then reports back to her boss if it's worth it. And then if Catherine's down, they're examined by a doctor and then are finally admitted into her bedchamber. And the Countess loves her job. She's Catherine's right-hand woman. They're besties. The Empress once described her as the person to whom I can say everything without fear of the consequences. But the Countess starts getting a little greedy with all these sexy bitches. She begins an affair with Ivan, Catherine's current flame, and she finds out because she walks in on them. So she flips her shit and exiles them both to Moscow. Which wasn't the only time she doled out punishments to disloyal lovers either. When she was 60, her lover, Mamonov, cheated on her with a 16-year-old princess, a girl young enough to be Catherine's granddaughter. So she starts spreading rumors that he's gone mad and supposedly sends the police to beat the princess in front of him. It ruins his life to the point where he, and the princess, who's now his fiancée, beg her on their knees for forgiveness. And Catherine being Catherine says, "Yeah, of course, I forgive you." And she gives them 100,000 rubles and 2,250 serfs and exiles them to Moscow. And later, Mamonov regrets his decision to throw away the opportunity of being a favorite to the Empress and writes her letters in an attempt to reignite their affair. She ignored him because you don't fuck with Catherine. Then there was this one guy right after she breaks up with Orlov she starts hooking up with named Alexander, who was a guard, and she walks by him one day and is like, "Damn, I need me a piece of that." So she appoints him to her bedchamber and then works on seducing him. He becomes her personal assistant, and he's expected to be at her beck and call at all times and isn't even allowed to leave the palace. But she finds him to be overly sentimental, and he's so emotional she totally loses patience with him, breaks it off, and starts hooking up with Potemkin again, saying of Alexander that he was an extremely boring bourgeois, and kicked him to the curb in favor of one of the greatest, most comical, amusing characters of this iron century, Potemkin. But her ex, Alexander, is ticked because he feels like Catherine treated him like a hooker. He said, "I was nothing more to her than a kind of male coquette, and I was treated as such. If I made a request for myself or anyone else, she did not reply, but the next day I found a banknote for several thousand rubles in my pocket. She never condescended to discuss with me any matters that lay close to my heart." She also had an erotic room at one of her homes where there were tables that had large penises for legs, and there were penises and vulvas carved out on the other furniture. The walls were covered in erotic art. She had erotic artifacts from Pompeii and a statue of a naked woman and a naked man. You can find pictures online of the room, and they're just as great as they sound. There was a popular rumor circulating that Catherine died at age 67 in 1796, attempting intercourse with a stallion, and the harness holding the horse above her allegedly broke and she was crushed. In reality, she just had a stroke in the bathroom and then passed peacefully in bed shortly thereafter. But the rumor persisted for centuries, likely because the open secret that was her sex life was considered so scandalous. And that's the best part about Catherine. It's easy to imagine the enlightened ruler laughing at the story of her death. She had so many miserable moments in her life that she overcame with sheer force of will and a simple refusal to be unhappy. She once wrote about her determination and resolution in her memoirs, saying, "I used to say to myself that happiness and misery depend on ourselves. If you feel unhappy, raise yourself above unhappiness, and so act that your happiness may be independent of all eventualities." Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or corrections for me, let me know in the comments section. Have a dirty day.